Emily Thompson, a wildlife photographer seeking peace, moves to a remote cabin in Montana. She discovers and bonds with Jasper, a young injured bobcat struggling to survive. Though initially hesitant to interfere with nature, Emily decides to provide food, documenting his recovery while ensuring he retains his wild instincts. Over time, Jasper grows stronger, transforming into a magnificent creature, his tawny coat regaining its luster, his amber eyes burning with renewed vitality. But on one fateful morning, tragedy strikes when Emily finds Jasper severely injured and incapacitated. The bobcat, who had thrived under her careful watch, now faces a harsh reality. His injuries are too severe for him to return to the wild. Emily faced an impossible choice that would challenge everything she believed about wildlife conservation. What compels someone to inflict such harm on a wild animal? Stay with us as we reveal a heartbreaking twist that will forever change Emily's life. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The first snow of November dusted the pine trees surrounding Emily Thompson's cabin in the Bitterroot Valley of western Montana. At 32, Emily had chosen solitude over the bustle of Missoula, where she'd worked as a wildlife photographer for the past decade. 3 months ago, she'd used her savings to purchase this small, rustic cabin nestled against national forest land, a place where she could finally breathe. Morning light filtered through frost-edged windows as Emily poured herself a second cup of coffee. The cabin was small but comfortable, with exposed wooden beams and a riverstone fireplace that dominated one wall. Her photography equipment was meticulously organized on a desk beneath the largest window, which offered a panoramic view of the forest and distant mountains. Emily wrapped herself in a wool cardigan her grandmother had knitted years ago and stepped onto her porch. The crisp air nipped at her cheeks as she surveyed her surroundings. This had become her morning ritual, coffee in hand, watching the wilderness awaken. Her editor at National Geographic had been understanding about her need for a change, agreeing to let her submit photos remotely while she worked on a personal project documenting Montana's wildlife. Movement at the tree line caught her attention. Emily squinted, reaching instinctively for the binoculars she kept hanging by the door. Through the lenses, she spotted it. A young bobcat, likely in its first year of independence. Its tawny fur was marked with distinctive dark spots, and tufted ears swiveled alertly as it padded through the undergrowth. Emily held her breath, watching the creature's graceful movements. The bobcat appeared thin, too thin for the approaching winter. As a wildlife photographer, Emily knew better than to interfere with wild animals. But something about this one pulled at her heart. Perhaps it was the limp she noticed as it moved, or maybe it was the unusual lack of wariness it displayed as it ventured closer to human habitation than most wild bobcats typically would. "You're having a tough time, aren't you?" she whispered. That afternoon, Emily drove into town and purchased several pounds of fresh chicken from the local butcher. She knew feeding wildlife was generally discouraged, but she reasoned that a temporary intervention might help this young animal survive until it could hunt properly again. That evening, she placed a small portion of meat at the edge of her property, far enough from the cabin to avoid habituating the bobcat to human presence. She set up a motion-sensitive camera nearby and retreated indoors. Hours later, reviewing the footage, she smiled as the camera had captured the bobcat cautiously approaching the offering, sniffing it thoroughly before consuming it with quick, hungry bites. "Just until you're stronger," Emily promised the image on her screen. Days passed, and a routine developed. Emily would leave food every other evening, gradually moving the offering spot farther into the woods to maintain the animal's wild instincts. She named him Jasper, after the deep orange-amber color of his eyes that reminded her of the gemstone. Through her camera lens, she documented his gradual improvement, the limp less pronounced, his coat becoming glossier, his frame filling out. By mid-December, Emily had amassed hundreds of remarkable photographs of Jasper. She'd captured him in various states, alert while hunting, playful as he batted at snowflakes, majestic as he surveyed his territory from atop a fallen log. In each image, his recovery was evident. She'd started sharing some of the photos online, careful to omit specific location details to protect him. One evening, as snow fell in thick flakes, Emily was surprised to see Jasper approach closer to the cabin than ever before. He sat just beyond the porch steps, those intelligent amber eyes fixed on her window. Emily remained still, camera in hand, hardly daring to breathe as she captured the moment. There seemed to be a silent acknowledgement between them. Wild animal and human observer, connected by an unspoken understanding. Concerned about establishing too comfortable a relationship between them, Emily contacted the Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center the next day. She spoke with Dr. Marjorie Winters, the head veterinarian, describing Jasper's condition and behavior. "It sounds like he might have been orphaned before learning all the necessary hunting skills," Dr. Winters suggested. "Or perhaps he was injured, and that's why he was struggling. Either way, it might be beneficial to have him checked out, vaccinated, and tagged before he becomes too dependent on supplemental feeding." Emily agreed, and together they developed a plan. The center would provide a humane trap, which Emily would bait with food. Once captured, Jasper would be transported to the center, examined, treated if necessary, and then released back into the same territory. "The goal is to ensure he's healthy enough to sustain himself," Dr. Winters explained. "We'll attach a small tracking tag that will help monitor his movements without interfering with his natural behavior." The plan worked seamlessly. 2 days later, Emily watched with mixed emotions as Jasper cautiously entered the large cage trap, drawn by the enticing aroma of fresh rabbit meat. She covered the cage with a blanket to keep him calm during the hour-long drive to the rehabilitation center. Dr. Winters and her team worked efficiently, sedating Jasper to minimize stress while they performed a thorough examination. Emily waited anxiously in the center's small lobby, surrounded by educational posters about local wildlife and rehabilitation success stories. "Good news," Dr. Winters announced when she emerged from the examination room. "He's a healthy young male, approximately 18 months old. There's evidence of an old injury to his left hind leg that healed naturally. That explains the limp you noticed. We've administered vaccinations and attached a small tracking tag to his ear." "So he can be released?" Emily asked. "Absolutely. He's in excellent condition now, thanks in part to your supplemental feeding. But I would recommend gradually reducing that support to ensure he maintains his hunting skills." That afternoon, Emily released Jasper near where she had first spotted him. She opened the cage door and stepped back, camera ready. The Bobcat emerged cautiously, surveying his surroundings before bounding into the forest without a backward glance. Emily smiled through tears she hadn't expected. Throughout January and February, Emily reduced the frequency of supplemental feeding, following Dr. Winters' advice. The tracking tag allowed her to monitor Jasper's movements, confirming that he was hunting successfully and establishing a healthy territory that overlapped slightly with her property. Occasionally, she would glimpse him through her telephoto lens, documenting his continued well-being from a respectful distance. By early March, Emily had stopped providing food altogether, though she maintained a small wildlife water station that benefited various forest creatures during dry spells. Her photo essay on Jasper was taking shape, telling the story of a young predator's recovery and return to self-sufficiency. Several wildlife magazines had expressed interest in the project, impressed by both the stunning imagery and the ethical approach to the interaction. On a mild spring morning, Emily was hiking along a ridge about a mile from her cabin, scouting locations for landscape photography, when she heard unusual sounds echoing through the forest. Human voices, loud and aggressive, punctuated by what sounded distressingly like an animal in distress. Emily quickened her pace, following the sounds to a small clearing. What she saw made her blood run cold. 4 teenagers, 2 boys and 2 girls, had cornered what appeared to be a bobcat. With horror, Emily recognized the distinctive pattern of Jasper's fur and the small tag on his ear. The teens were wielding sticks and throwing rocks, laughing as the terrified animal tried to retreat, limping severely and bleeding from several wounds. "Hey!" Emily shouted, anger overwhelming her usual caution around confrontation. "Stop that right now!" The teenagers startled at her appearance. One of the boys, tall with a Letterman jacket emblazoned with the logo of the local high school, stepped forward defensively. "We're just having a little fun," he said, his tone dismissive. "It's just a wild animal." "That wild animal is a protected species," Emily countered, pulling out her phone. "What you're doing is illegal wildlife harassment, and I've got your faces on camera now." This was a bluff. She hadn't actually started recording, but it worked. The teens exchanged nervous glances before the apparent ringleader shrugged with affected nonchalance. "Whatever. It's boring anyway," he muttered, gesturing to his friends. They dropped their sticks and retreated through the trees, casting resentful looks over their shoulders. Once they were gone, Emily approached Jasper cautiously. The bobcat was hunched against the base of a pine tree, breathing rapidly, one leg held at an unnatural angle. Blood matted the fur on his flank and head. Despite his injured state, he hissed weakly when Emily came too close, wild instincts still intact. "Oh, Jasper," Emily whispered, tears welling in her eyes. She quickly called the rehabilitation center, describing the situation to Dr. Winters. "He needs immediate medical attention," the veterinarian confirmed. "But be careful approaching him. Injured wild animals are unpredictable, even ones that know you." Emily returned to her cabin as quickly as possible, retrieving the transport cage and a thick pair of handling gloves. When she returned to the clearing, Jasper hadn't moved, a sign of how severely injured he must be. Using a blanket as a barrier and working with extreme caution, Emily managed to guide the weakened bobcat into the cage. The drive to the rehabilitation center seemed endless. Emily kept glancing at the cage secured in her passenger seat, whispering reassurances though she knew Jasper couldn't understand her words. What he had endured at human hands broke her heart. After all her efforts to help him maintain his wild nature while ensuring his health, the cruelty of those teenagers had undone everything. Dr. Winters was waiting when Emily arrived, and a team immediately took Jasper into the treatment area. Emily paced the small lobby for what felt like hours, guilt and anger churning inside her. She should have done more to protect him. She should have reported the teenagers to the authorities immediately instead of just scaring them off. Finally, Dr. Winters emerged, her expression grave but not without hope. "He's stable, but the injuries are significant," she explained. "There's a compound fracture to his right hind leg that will require surgery and a stabilizing plate. He also has several lacerations and a minor concussion." "Will he recover?" Emily asked, voice tight with emotion. "With proper care, yes." "But Emily..." Dr. Winters hesitated. "Recovery will be lengthy, and given the extent of the injury and the rehabilitation required, it's unlikely he could be successfully released back into the wild. His mobility will be compromised. The implications sank in heavily. What happens to him then? We have connections with several wildlife sanctuaries that provide permanent homes for animals that can't be reintroduced to their natural habitats. But I should warn you, the surgery and extended care will be expensive, and our center's resources are limited. Emily nodded, determination replacing despair. Tell me what he needs. I'll find a way. That evening, Emily created an online fundraiser, sharing Jasper's story and some of her most compelling photographs of him in his natural habitat. She detailed the circumstances of his injury without naming the teenagers, though she had since reported the incident to local conservation officers. She explained the medical costs and the need to secure him a permanent sanctuary placement. To her amazement, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Wildlife enthusiasts, conservation groups, and ordinary people touched by Jasper's plight contributed generously. Her post was shared thousands of times across various social platforms. By morning, the fundraiser had exceeded its initial goal, with donations continuing to pour in. Local media picked up the story, and a reporter from the Missoula newspaper interviewed Emily about her relationship with Jasper and the circumstances that had led to his current situation. The article, accompanied by Emily's stunning photography, generated even more interest and support. It's not just about one bobcat, Emily explained during the interview. It's about our responsibility toward the wildlife we share this land with, and about teaching the next generation to respect rather than harm these creatures. Jasper's surgery was successful, though his recovery would indeed be lengthy. Emily visited the rehabilitation center daily, sitting quietly near his enclosure, sometimes reading aloud from nature books or simply talking softly about her day. The staff were surprised by how calmly he accepted human presence, not with domesticated tameness, but with a curious tolerance unusual for his species. "He seems to recognize your voice," Dr. Winters observed one afternoon. "He's calmer when you're here." As weeks passed, Emily used her photography skills to document Jasper's recovery, sharing updates with the growing community of supporters who had contributed to his care. The story had struck a chord, prompting discussions about wildlife protection and coexistence in rural communities. The local high school even invited Emily to give a presentation about wildlife photography and conservation ethics, an opportunity she embraced wholeheartedly. By midsummer, Jasper had made remarkable progress. His fracture had healed, though as predicted, he would always move with a pronounced limp that would compromise his hunting ability. His once matted fur had regrown glossy and thick, and his amber eyes had regained their alert, confident gleam. He had transformed from the frightened, injured creature Emily had rescued to a strong, majestic exemplar of his species, albeit one that could no longer survive independently in the wild. The search for a permanent sanctuary placement proved challenging. Many facilities were at capacity, and bobcats required specialized enclosures and care. Emily was adamant that wherever Jasper went, he would have ample space, enrichment, and proper respect for his wild nature. In August, just as Emily was beginning to worry they wouldn't find a suitable placement, she received a call from Dr. Winters. "I have potentially good news," the veterinarian said. "The Wild Heart Sanctuary in Oregon heard about Jasper's story. They have a natural habitat enclosure that's just become available, and they're interested in providing him a permanent home." Wild Heart was renowned for its ethical approach to sanctuary care, providing spacious, naturalistic environments and minimizing human interaction to preserve the animal's wild behaviors. Emily researched the facility thoroughly, exchanging emails with the director and reviewing their philosophy and practices. "It's perfect," she finally told Dr. Winters, "but Oregon is a long way to transport him." That's where the second half of your fundraiser money comes in, Dr. Winters suggested. We can arrange professional wildlife transport. A week later, Emily found herself saying goodbye to Jasper. The specialized transport carrier had arrived at dawn, and she watched as experienced handlers transferred the Bobcat's travel crate into the climate-controlled vehicle. Through the mesh door, Jasper's amber eyes met hers one last time. Alert, unafraid, and utterly wild, despite everything he had endured at human hands. "Live well," Emily whispered. The journey to his new home would take 2 days, with overnight monitoring stops to ensure his comfort and safety. Emily would not be present when he was released into his new habitat, a deliberate decision to minimize human association at the beginning of his sanctuary life. In the weeks that followed, Emily found herself at loose ends, her cabin suddenly too quiet without the purpose that Jasper's situation had provided. She continued her wildlife photography, but something was missing. The experience had changed her in ways she was still discovering. Then an email arrived from Wild Heart Sanctuary. Attached were several photographs of Jasper exploring his new habitat. 5 acres of woodland, rock formations, and climbing structures, all securely enclosed but designed to mimic his natural environment. The sanctuary staff had respected Emily's wish that human interaction be minimized, observing and documenting from a distance as he acclimated to his new home. "He's settled in remarkably well," the sanctuary director wrote. "His story has inspired us to develop an educational program about human-wildlife conflict and conservation. With your permission, we'd like to use your photographs and documentation of his journey as part of this initiative." That evening, sitting on her porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades reminiscent of Jasper's tawny coat, Emily felt a sense of purpose crystallize within her. She opened her laptop and began typing a response to the sanctuary director, outlining an idea that had been forming since Jasper's departure. 6 months later, Emily stood before a group of visitors at Wild Heart Sanctuary. A selection of her photographs displayed on large weatherproof panels along the pathway to the Bobcat habitat area. As the sanctuary's first artist in residence, she divided her time between Montana and Oregon, documenting the lives of the sanctuary's residents and developing educational materials that connected viewers emotionally to the animals' stories. Behind a discreet viewing blind, visitors could sometimes glimpse Jasper as he moved through his territory, muscular and confident despite his permanent limp. He remained wild in all the ways that mattered, hunting the small prey animals that sanctuary staff provided, marking his territory, and generally ignoring human observers unless they became too intrusive. "The most important thing to understand about these animals," Emily explained to the group, "is that our respect for their wild nature is essential, even when circumstances bring them into our care. Jasper isn't here because we wanted to possess or tame something wild. He's here because human actions, both helpful and harmful, altered the course of his life." As if on cue, Jasper appeared on a rocky outcropping across the habitat, surveying his domain with regal composure. The visitors murmured in appreciation, cameras and phones capturing the moment. Emily smiled, recognizing the familiar gleam of those amber eyes that had once regarded her from the edge of her Montana property. Among the visitors that day was a teenage girl who lingered after the others had moved on to the next exhibit. She approached Emily hesitantly. "I was one of them," she admitted quietly, unable to meet Emily's eyes. "One of the kids who hurt him. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Emily's heart constricted with surprise and a complex mixture of emotions. She studied the girl's face, recognizing her now from that terrible day in the forest. "What made you come here?" Emily asked, keeping her voice neutral. Your photos and the story, they were everywhere online, and then they showed them at our school assembly about wildlife conservation. The girl finally looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I didn't think about him as a real living thing that day. He was just something to mess with. But seeing everything he went through afterward and how many people cared about him, it made me realize how wrong we were. Emily nodded slowly. Jasper paid a high price for that lesson. I know, the girl whispered. I'm working at the local animal shelter now, and I'm going to study wildlife biology in college. I want to help fix things, not destroy them. As the girl walked away, Emily turned back toward the habitat where Jasper had settled in a patch of dappled sunlight, grooming himself with typical feline fastidiousness. There was poetry in this moment that the photographer in her appreciated. The injured becoming whole in a new way. The harmful finding a path to healing. She lifted her camera, framing the perfect shot of Jasper at peace in his sanctuary home. The image would join others in the educational materials being developed for schools across the region, telling a story of harm and healing, wildness and care, separation and connection. In the end, Emily reflected, it wasn't a story about a girl feeding a bobcat. It was about humanity's complex relationship with the wild world, our capacity for both thoughtless destruction and extraordinary compassion, and the imperative to foster the latter while constraining the former. Jasper's journey from injured wild creature to ambassador for his kind embodied that complexity perfectly. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting Jasper's tawny coat with golden light, Emily captured one final image for the day. In it, the bobcat gazed directly at the camera, amber eyes reflecting the setting sun, wild, dignified, and utterly himself.